Stonehenge is a prehistoric monument located on Salisbury Plain in southern England. Constructed in multiple phases beginning around 3000 BCE, its massive stone arrangement implies deliberate planning and long-term effort. The limitation is that no written records from its builders exist to explain its purpose or construction methods. The site consists of large standing stones arranged in circular and horseshoe patterns, including sarsen stones weighing up to 25 tons. This scale implies advanced organizational capability. The limitation is uncertainty about how Neolithic societies coordinated such labor without metal tools or wheels. Archaeological evidence indicates Stonehenge was built over more than 1,000 years. This suggests cultural continuity across generations. The limitation is that changing builders may have altered intentions, complicating interpretation. The largest stones, known as sarsens, were sourced from Marlborough Downs, approximately 30 kilometers away. This implies intentional long-distance transport. The limitation is lack of direct evidence showing the exact transportation methods used. Smaller bluestones originated in the Preseli Hills of Wales, over 200 kilometers from Stonehenge. This implies extraordinary logistical effort. The limitation is that the route and means of transport remain debated. Experimental archaeology has shown that stones of this size can be moved using wooden sledges and rollers. This demonstrates feasibility. The limitation is that modern experiments rely on assumptions about ancient labor organization. No definitive tools used specifically for stone transport have been found at the site. This absence limits reconstruction. The implication is reliance on indirect inference. The stones were shaped with remarkable precision, including mortise and tenon joints. This implies sophisticated craftsmanship. The limitation is that the tools capable of such precision have not been conclusively identified. Stonehenge's layout aligns with the solstices, particularly the summer solstice sunrise. This suggests astronomical significance. The limitation is that alignment alone does not confirm ritual intent. Similar stone circles exist across Britain, indicating a broader cultural tradition. This implies Stonehenge was part of a larger pattern. The limitation is that Stonehenge's scale and complexity exceed most other sites. Excavations reveal human burials near Stonehenge, suggesting funerary use. This implies ritual importance. The limitation is that burials occurred over extended periods, not necessarily during construction. Animal bones and feasting remains found nearby suggest large gatherings. This implies communal events. The limitation is that feasting does not clarify the monument's primary function. Stonehenge was built in an open landscape with long sidelines. This implies intentional placement. The limitation is uncertainty about how the surrounding environment influenced meaning. The monument's stones were rearranged multiple times. This implies evolving purpose. The limitation is that motives behind redesign remain unknown. No definitive evidence links Stonehenge to a specific deity or belief system. This limits religious interpretation. The implication is interpretive restraint. Radiocarbon dating of nearby features provides approximate construction timelines. This supports chronology. The limitation is indirect association with the stones themselves. The effort required to build Stonehenge suggests social cooperation on a large scale. This implies organized leadership. The limitation is absence of evidence identifying such leadership. Some researchers propose Stonehenge served as a healing site based on human remains showing injuries. This implies therapeutic significance. The limitation is correlational rather than causal evidence. Others argue it functioned as a ceremonial center for regional populations. This implies social integration. The limitation is lack of direct testimony. Stonehenge's enduring presence indicates long-term cultural importance. This implies sustained relevance. The limitation is that longevity does not explain original intent. The surrounding area contains numerous other monuments, including burial mounds and avenues. This suggests a ritual landscape. The limitation is disentangling relationships among sites. Construction required significant resource investment. This implies prioritization over daily subsistence. The limitation is unclear economic impact. The monument's design reflects both engineering and symbolic considerations. This implies multifaceted purpose. The limitation is isolating each function. Stonehenge's stones show evidence of deliberate placement and leveling. This implies planning accuracy. The limitation is lack of construction diagrams or plans. Weathering patterns suggest stones stood upright shortly after placement. This implies stability. The limitation is inability to reconstruct exact erection techniques. Some stones were removed or toppled in antiquity. This implies later alteration. The limitation is uncertainty about reasons for removal. Archaeological interpretation relies heavily on material remains. Stonehenge offers limited artifacts. This constrains analysis. Despite extensive study, Stonehenge resists definitive explanation. This sustains debate. The limitation is evidentiary scarcity. Public fascination often exceeds scholarly certainty. This influences perception. The limitation is separating myth from evidence. At this contextual stage, Stonehenge stands as a documented engineering achievement with unresolved methods and purpose. The implication is enduring uncertainty, while the limitation remains clear. The builders left no direct explanation. Investigations into Stonehenge increasingly focus on how Neolithic communities organized labor over long periods. This implies social coordination beyond small kin groups. The limitation is that social structures leave minimal direct archaeological traces. Evidence from nearby settlements suggests seasonal occupation by large groups. This implies periodic gatherings for construction or ritual. The limitation is that settlement remains do not specify activities at the monument. Transporting sarsen stones likely required coordinated teams using ropes and wooden frameworks. This suggests engineering knowledge. The limitation is that organic materials rarely survive, leaving reconstruction speculative. The Bluestones movement from Wales raises questions about motivation, not just capability. This implies symbolic value. The limitation is lack of consensus on why these specific stones were chosen. Isotopic analysis of human remains indicates people traveled long distances to the region. This implies Stonehenge attracted non-local populations. The limitation is that travel reasons cannot be directly inferred. Some researchers argue Stonehenge marked territorial boundaries. This implies political function. The limitation is that boundary markers typically show clear spatial patterns. Acoustic studies suggest the stone arrangement alters sound perception. This implies experiential design. The limitation is that acoustic effects may be incidental rather than intentional. The alignment with solar events has been statistically evaluated, showing intentional orientation. This implies astronomical awareness. The limitation is that awareness does not explain broader architectural choices. Stonehenge's construction coincided with shifts in burial practices in Britain. This suggests cultural transition. The limitation is establishing causation rather than correlation. Excavations reveal earlier timber structures on the site. This implies continuity of sacred space. The limitation is that timber phases are less well preserved. The stone's precise shaping indicates planning before transport. This implies advanced foresight. The limitation is absence of evidence showing where shaping occurred. Wear patterns on tools found nearby suggest stoneworking activity. This supports construction hypotheses. The limitation is linking tools directly to Stonehenge. Some scholars propose Stonehenge functioned as a calendar. This implies practical application. The limitation is that simpler calendars existed without monumental architecture. The monument's visual dominance in the landscape implies symbolic power. This suggests social messaging. The limitation is interpreting intended audience. Comparative studies with European megalithic sites show shared techniques. This implies cultural exchange. The limitation is variability in local adaptations. Radiocarbon dating shows overlapping phases of activity. This implies continuous use. The limitation is distinguishing construction from later modification. The absence of domestic structures nearby suggests Stonehenge was not residential. This implies specialized use. The limitation is defining that use precisely. Some interpretations emphasize ancestor veneration. This implies ritual continuity. The limitation is lack of direct symbolic artifacts. The scale of effort suggests Stonehenge served a purpose significant enough to justify resource investment. This implies high value. The limitation is subjective assessment of value. Modern reconstructions often rely on idealized scenarios. This introduces bias. The limitation is projecting coherence onto fragmented evidence. Stonehenge's stones show evidence of repair and repositioning. This implies maintenance. The limitation is understanding maintenance motivations. Climatic conditions during construction were relatively stable. This implies environmental feasibility. The limitation is that climate alone does not explain monumentality. The monument's orientation remained consistent across phases. This implies persistent symbolic reference. The limitation is interpreting that reference. Some researchers suggest Stonehenge represented unity among dispersed groups. This implies social integration. The limitation is absence of supporting inscriptions. Archaeological narratives evolve as new data emerges. This implies interpretive fluidity. The limitation is lack of decisive evidence. Stonehenge's enduring mystery partly results from selective preservation. Stone remains survive. Organic context does not. The limitation is evidentiary imbalance. Public reconstructions often emphasize spectacle over process. This affects perception. The limitation is conflation of entertainment with scholarship. The monument has been studied for centuries, yet questions persist. This implies complexity. The limitation is diminishing explanatory returns. No single theory accounts for all features of Stonehenge. This implies multifunctionality. The limitation is risk of unfalsifiable explanations. At this investigative stage, Stonehenge's construction methods are partially understood, but motivations remain uncertain. The implication is ongoing inquiry, while the limitation persists. Material evidence cannot fully explain intent. The persistence of unanswered questions about Stonehenge reflects broader limits in interpreting prehistoric societies. Without written language, meaning must be inferred indirectly. The limitation is that inference cannot fully replace direct explanation. Stonehenge is often compared to other ancient engineering feats, yet it differs in scale and context. This suggests unique regional expression. The limitation is that uniqueness complicates comparative analysis. The monument's long construction timeline implies that its significance endured beyond its original builders. This suggests cultural inheritance. The limitation is uncertainty about how later communities understood the site. Some scholars argue Stonehenge's importance lay in process rather than final form. This implies meaning in participation. The limitation is that process leaves few material traces. The effort invested in transporting stones over long distances implies deliberate choice rather than convenience. This suggests symbolic motivation. The limitation is inability to identify that symbolism. Stonehenge's visibility from afar may have served as a landmark. This implies navigational or territorial significance. The limitation is lack of corroborating evidence. The monument's survival contrasts with the disappearance of many contemporary wooden structures. This affects interpretation. The limitation is preservation bias. Archaeological interpretation must account for both engineering feasibility and cultural context. This duality shapes debate. The limitation is incomplete contextual data. Stonehenge's alignment with celestial events has remained consistent over millennia. This suggests enduring reference points. The limitation is explaining why those events mattered socially. The absence of domestic debris reinforces the idea of special purpose use. This implies separation from everyday life. The limitation is defining that special purpose. Modern technologies have refined measurements but not resolved meaning. This highlights methodological boundaries. The limitation is that precision does not equal understanding. Stonehenge continues to attract interdisciplinary study. This reflects its complexity. The limitation is that multiple disciplines yield divergent conclusions. The monument has been reinterpreted repeatedly across centuries. This suggests adaptive meaning. The limitation is disentangling ancient intent from later reinterpretation. Stonehenge's role in popular imagination often exceeds scholarly certainty. This affects public understanding. The limitation is managing expectation versus evidence. The site's protected status restricts invasive research. This preserves integrity. The limitation is constrained investigation. Stonehenge exemplifies how monumental architecture can outlast its cultural explanation. This defines its mystery. The limitation is irreversible loss of context. Archaeological consensus accepts partial answers rather than definitive conclusions. This reflects methodological caution. The limitation is unresolved core questions. The monument's builders likely possessed knowledge systems now lost. This implies cognitive complexity. The limitation is inability to reconstruct those systems. Stonehenge's continued study reveals as much about modern inquiry as ancient practice. This is a meta-implication. The limitation is reflexive bias. The absence of a singular explanation sustains scholarly debate. This keeps the site relevant. The limitation is perpetual uncertainty. Stonehenge remains a case study in interpreting material culture without narrative. This shapes methodology. The limitation is evidentiary silence. Each proposed explanation addresses some features while leaving others unexplained. This suggests incomplete models. The limitation is fragmented understanding. The monument challenges assumptions about technological capability in prehistory. This broadens perspective. The limitation is avoiding anachronism. Stonehenge's endurance underscores the power of collective effort. This implies social cohesion. The limitation is inferring cohesion without records. The site continues to resist reduction to a single function. This defines its complexity. The limitation is explanatory insufficiency. Stonehenge occupies a boundary between engineering, ritual, and landscape design. This complicates classification. The limitation is categorical overlap. The lack of closure ensures ongoing investigation. This sustains interest. The limitation is acceptance of incomplete answers. Stonehenge illustrates how some historical questions remain open-ended. This informs historical humility. The limitation is epistemological. The monument endures not because it is understood, but because it is not. This absence defines the mystery. The limitation is unresolved intent. The facts are real. The explanation is up to you.